Well, Happy New Year, and this is the first diving deep class of 2020, and we're going to be starting a new topic tonight that we ought to be going through January and maybe some of February as well. We're going to be diving deep into worship, going into what the Bible says about worship. I was talking with Adrian the other day, or actually yesterday, about the topic, and he said something that is I found to be very true and very insightful. He said that he was glad that we were talking about this topic because he got the impression, and I can see this, and he got the impression that it might be where people think, maybe a lot of people, or at least some people that go to church on Sundays, that they get the idea that worship is you show up and you sit in the pew and that's it. I have worshipped today. Maybe sing a little bit, bow your head, close your eyes during a prayer, listen to the lesson. And that's pretty much it. Where biblically, worship includes that, but it is a lot more than that. And so, in order for us to get an idea of what God has in mind when He's talking about worshiping Him, what we're going to do tonight in this first discussion is we're going to focus on the New Testament and look at a little bit at the Old Testament, but focus on the New Testament and look at the different. In English Bibles, it'll say worship or service, pretty much. But there are different terms in the original language that are translated in various verses, worship or service, and those terms mean different things. And that was what God had in mind when He inspired the writers of the New Testament to use that terminology in the Bible. So we want to get a good idea of what worship is, what God had in mind. We're going to look at that, and so that's the purpose of the handout here. We're going to define our terms tonight in this first lesson. Again, look, you got the handout when it comes to the spelling of the terms. In English, just looking at the word worship, we get that word worship originally from two other English words. The word worth, which of course means whether one is worthy, and then ship, the suffix ship, which usually in English that has to do with the quality of something or the condition of something. And so the idea behind the English word worship, combining worth and ship, is worship in English is pretty much promoting the idea that the object that you're worshiping is worthy. And so if you are worshiping God, what does that say about God in your view? That He is worthy. That's right, that He is worth something. Now, this one English word worship has to do duty for several words that are in Greek that God inspired the original writers of the New Testament to use. So if you look at your list, the first one is called proskuneo. Proskuneo is probably the Greek word that's translated worship the most in the New Testament. It literally means to kiss the hand toward. Another way I've heard that explained is you're kind of blowing kisses towards. It's a show of affection. To do obeisance, or in other words, to show honor or reverence. To prostrate oneself, to bow or to fall down before an object that you want to venerate, that you want to honor. Uh, Go over to Matthew 8, verse 2. And you'll see in Matthew 8, verse 2, that a leper came before Jesus and knelt before him. Notice that the leper knelt down before Jesus. If you go to the next chapter, chapter 9, and if you look at verse 18, you'll see that a ruler, Jairus, came before Jesus and said that he knelt before Jesus as well. Um, There's well, what the reason I'm bringing this up is because back in that culture, a lot of times if you were dealing with someone that you didn't necessarily think of as deity, but you did recognize as a human being of worth, maybe if you were a soldier, a human being of higher rank than you, if you had a very high opinion of this human being and you wanted something from that human being, then a lot of times you would bow down. You would prostrate yourself, which is which is what proskuneo worship. That term for worship means. So you see this leper. You see the ruler coming down. Now the leper wanted to be cleansed. The ruler wanted his daughter raised from the dead. The fact that they bowed down to Jesus wanting something and obviously recognizing that he had the power to do it, that does not necessarily indicate that they had already accepted his divinity or that he was the Messiah. They might have, but it could have also been the idea that they recognized that they want something. Here's a man that is more powerful than them in a certain way, and he can help them. And so they're showing him respect. They're showing him honor. You go over to Matthew 28. We have another example. Now this is you'll see that after his resurrection, he appears before the women. And it says Jesus met them at verse 9 of Matthew 28. Jesus met them and said greetings. Now it says that they came up and took hold of his feet. If they're taking hold of his feet, what is that? Where are they? They're on the ground, right? They prostrated themselves on the ground. And it says that they worshiped him. Verse 17 of the same chapter, the disciples, after his resurrection, it says that when they saw him, they worshiped him. Again, proskuneo is being used here. Now, in this case, after the resurrection, I'm pretty sure that this bowing down, prostrating themselves, was worship of deity. They recognized his deity, his divinity, in this particular case. But also, to give you one more example that's a little bit more kind of sobering. If you go to Mark 15, verse 19, when he's being tortured during his trial, after he had been scourged, the Roman soldiers in Mark 15, verse 19, they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him. And notice, kneeling down in homage to him. Now, obviously, they didn't consider him to be deity. But what were they told that he was? The king of the Jews, right? And they despised the Jews. And so they were mocking him. But why were they kneeling down in homage to him? Because that's what you would do to a king. But they were doing it out of mockery in their minds of his supposed kingship. So proskuneo has to do with affection, kissing your hand or blowing kisses towards, showing reverence, oftentimes bowing down, prostrating yourself. Now, from that idea of showing reverence and affection and bowing down came a general usage of worship, the term and the concept of worship, and not just worship, but acts of reverence in general. Go to John chapter 12. Look at verse 20. This is one of the Jews' feast days under the law of Moses, and it says that among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. Now, the word worship is proskuneo. These Greeks were going to prostrate themselves or show great honor, reverence, or show great affection to God. Give you another example, Revelation chapter 14, verse 7. There's an angel, and the angel says in Revelation 14, verse 7, with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. Worship, proskuneo. Show him affection, blow kisses towards him, or kiss his hand. Show him reverence, bow down, prostrate yourself. That's all. Those are all the concepts behind that word. Now, in the New Testament, this word and the concepts that are in the definition of this word for worship, it wasn't always directed towards God. In Acts 10, verse 25, Cornelius, the Apostle Peter, comes to his house because an angel told Cornelius to go get Peter. And Peter would tell him words by which he would be saved. So when Peter shows up at his house, Cornelius, very sincerely, out of ignorance, but also sincerity, he sees this person that is obviously very important. The angel told him to get him. So what's he wanting to do? He's going to proskuneo. He bows down. And Peter says, stand up. I'm just a man. Worship God. Acts 7, verse 43, you read of proskuneo, of worship towards pagan idols. Satan wanted Jesus to proskuneo him. Remember the third temptation? You can have all what you see on the mountaintop, all the kingdoms and everything. All you have to do is, remember the terminology, fall down and worship me. Fall down and proskuneo. You're already down, but falling down, you're already on your knees or prostrating yourself. Give me honor, give me reverence, show me affection. That's what Satan was wanting here. In Revelation 22, verse 8, John made the same mistake that Cornelius made, which is interesting, considering that John was an apostle, whereas Cornelius wasn't even a Christian at the time. Cornelius didn't have any reason to know better. John should have known better, but in Revelation 22, verse 8, he tries to worship an angel. And the angel, just like Peter did with Cornelius, the angel corrects him as well. And then, of course, proskuneo is given towards the one true God as well. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, when Satan tempts Jesus, you can have all of this if you fall down and proskuneo. You fall down and worship me. What did Jesus say? He said, it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Now here's something interesting. Go to 1 Corinthians 14 and look at verse 25. Now if you look at the context of chapter 14, especially really almost the entire chapter. One of the things that's being talked about in the chapter is the worship assembly. The Corinthians, when they assembled together to worship God and learn from Him, apparently, if you read chapter 14, their worship assemblies were chaotic. People were interrupting each other. There was a lot of confusion and chaos. The very last verse of chapter 14, verse 40, it pretty much sums up what the entire chapter is about. Let all things be done decently and in order. Now, one of the problems that was in the Corinthian church was that they had miraculous spiritual gifts. Some of them had the miraculous spiritual gift of speaking in tongues. Now, speaking in tongues is not what the charismatic churches define it as today, where it's just gibberish that only you and supposedly God knows. No, Acts 2 makes it clear that speaking in tongues miraculously was actually speaking in an actual known societal national language And what made it a miracle was 1 second ago you didn't know it at all, and now you're fluent in it. That's what makes it a miracle. So some of them had that miraculous spiritual gift, and one of the problems at Corinth was that they wanted. Apparently, everyone wanted that. Apparently, it was very cool, and they wanted that. Um, and so, if one of them had that gift during the worship service, he didn't care like if the preacher was speaking the language that everyone in the room knew. He wanted to practice his cool gift, so he would just get up and he would just start saying, "Hey, look at me! I'm speaking this in a language that no one knew." And what have you ever heard a language, an unknown language, for the very first time, and you have no idea what's being said, do you? It doesn't it sound like gibberish? It certainly does. Now you get a little familiar. You might, well, that I think that's Spanish. That might be German. Something like that. But first time, I remember the first time my girls heard Spanish. First time, I think they were 3, maybe somewhere around there. What is that, Daddy? What is that? And then I looked at it and I said, "Hola," and they're, what are you doing? Exactly, exactly.
The Greeks call it bar bar bar. That's
Yeah.
why they call them barbarians.
Yeah, exactly. Very good point. Very good point. So they were doing this in the worship assembly. So if you look at verses 24 and 25 of chapter 14, and Paul is basically saying, look, if you want to have a miraculous spiritual gift, it shouldn't be speaking in tongues that you're wanting. It should be prophecy that you're wanting. And here's one of the benefits of prophesying. Verse 24, if all prophesy and an unbeliever, obviously non-Christian, or an outsider, again, non-Christian, if they enter what? You read the context, enter your assembly. Enter the place where you guys are worshiping together. He is convicted by all, he is called to account by all, the secrets of his heart are disclosed, and so falling on his face, he will worship, proskuneo, God, and declare that God is really among you. In other words, if you read further up, earlier verses, if the guy comes in and all of you all are just speaking in different languages, he's not going to know what's going on. He's going to think all of you all are crazy. You're not going to convert that guy to Christ. You're never going to see him again. If you have a visitor come in and everyone is prophesying, giving an actual message from God in a language he can understand, he is more likely to be converted, to be convicted. He's more likely to stay and worship, become a Christian. Uh, this is the only place in the entire New Testament where the most commonly used word that's translated worship in the New Testament is used in the context of talking about a worship assembly. This is the only place right here, and I find that very interesting. Um, it's the only time it's ever used in reference to a church meeting. And notice here it's done by an outsider, by someone who's not a Christian. So that's proskuneo. Any questions on that before we move on to the next one? You look on your list. The next one is liturgia, and that's where we get our English term liturgy. Have you ever heard liturgy, the term liturgy before? This word literally refers to public service. It's used in Romans 13, verse 6. Let's go over there real quick. Yes, but here in Romans 13, verse 6, it's not actually referring to religious service at all. This is talking about governmental authorities. And it says, for because of this, you also pay taxes for the authorities. The governmental authorities are, my version says, ministers of God, servants of God. That's that word. That's the word. They're attending to this very thing. They're doing a public service. Now, the reason I'm including this word is because 2,000 years ago, outside of the New Testament, in that time period's Jewish literature, and in the literature that Christians wrote outside of the Bible in that era, whenever they would be talking about a religious service, this would be the word that would be commonly used. Any sort of religious service whatsoever. You're in Romans. Go to chapter 15. Here's one case where it's used in the New Testament. Romans 15, verse 16. Romans 15, verse 16. Now here, this word is used Paul's using it to describe his preaching ministry. He's comparing it to the priestly service of Romans in this verse. To be a minister, the servant, that's the word, liturgia, of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles in the priestly service, same word, liturgia of the gospel of God, so that the offering of the Gentiles may be acceptable, sanctified by the Holy Spirit. This word has to do a lot with service, being a servant. If you look at the very, if you go down to verse 27 of chapter 15, this same word's used to refer to the contribution. Verses 26 and 27. For Macedonia and Achaia had been pleased to make some contribution for the poor among the saints of Jerusalem, for they were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have come to share in their spiritual blessings, they ought to be of service to them in their material blessings. Also used to refer to the contribution in the same contribution actually in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 12 as well. What do we do when we call what's another term that we use for the contribution today? What else do we call it besides the contribution? Offering. And what's offering bring to mind? What in the Old Testament, what was an offering? It was a sacrifice. It was a sacrifice. And I think from my research, I think that this liturgia and how it's used here to refer to the contribution, the offering, I think that it was a metaphor. They were in Corinthians and in Romans, they were calling on those who made this contribution to be making a sacrifice. I think that it's used here as a metaphor for sacrifice. Go over to compare, go over to Philippians chapter 2 real quick. Verse 17. Philippians 2 verse 17, the same word is used. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon thee, notice the sacrificial, there's the word in the Greek. The sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Look at verse 30, same chapter. For he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service, same word, to me. Service, liturgy, is correlated with sacrifice here. Now, it was most commonly used in the New Testament to refer to the Jewish temple service that the Jews practiced in the Old Law. Luke chapter 1 verse 23, you have John the Baptist's father, and he is a priest, and this same word, service, is being used to describe what he was doing in the temple. Hebrews 9 verse 21 and Hebrews 10 verse 11 also uses the same word to describe the Jewish temple service. It's also used, we saw in Romans 15 verse 16 that Paul used it to describe his own preaching ministry. He called it his public service. Hebrews 8 verse 2 and verse 6 uses it to describe Jesus's priestly service, that it was a high priest as well. So it was used to describe preaching, pretty much, specifically prophesying. The only time this word is used in the New Testament in the context of Christians meeting together is in Acts 13 verse 2. The word service is used there, but in the context they're talking about coming together, or a prophet would be prophesying to them, which kind of implies they were coming together to worship. Okay? So far, we've looked at two of the technical terms. Proskuneo, what's the concept of worship behind proskuneo? It's showing honor. Honor mixed with affection. Honor shown in the same way back then they would show to people that they considered worthy, that they considered to be of higher importance or higher rank than themselves. They would show it by falling down, bowing down, prostrating themselves. So that's the idea behind worship, showing honor and affection both in your mind and also in action. But then also here in liturgia, you get the idea of worship being a service as well. This is one. This next one, latria, also has to do with service. Now, it's primarily religious service. The word latrio literally means to perform religious service, to carry out cultic duties. Now, the reason I said cultic was because Christianity in this time period and in its early days, Christianity was surrounded by pagan polytheistic religions, and that had a lot more worshipers in their religions than Christianity did starting out. And the way they would worship their gods all was very ritualistic, very cultish. And so some of the terminology that was used in the vernacular that was used in that society that had to do with worship, that had to do with religion. The only people that were really using it worldwide, the majority of the people that were using that terminology worldwide were pagans. And so it had as its meaning to the world cultic, a cultic, ritualistic feel to it. To give you an example, latreo, to perform a religious service, to carry out cultic duties. Acts chapter 7, verse 42, if you're taking notes, and also Romans 1, verse 25. The New Testament uses this term in those two verses to describe pagan worship, not Christian worship of the one true God, but pagan worship, which is fitting because that's how the pagans themselves use the term to describe their own worship. Now, go back to Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, Acts 7, verse 42, and also Romans 1, verse 25. But go back to Matthew 4, verse 10, and someone read that for me. Matthew 4, verse 10.
It says, Then saith Jesus unto them, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve.
All right, look again at verse 9. What was the temptation? I will give you all of these kingdoms and the glory of them if you fall down and worship, proskuneo me. You show me honor and reverence and affection, right? And what was Jesus' reply? Verse 10, he quotes scripture. You shall worship proskuneo, show honor and affection towards the Lord your God, and him only shall you what? Serve. The words latreo. Latreo means perform religious service. So notice how he's using two different terms pretty much interchangeably here. Proskuneo and latreo, he's using them interchangeably. Worship is about showing God honor, is showing him reverence, showing him affection. Proskuneo is also serving him. Now, where do you think we got the term? How many of you have heard this term before? Worship service. You ever heard that? Where do you think the term service came from? Right here. This is where it came from. Because latreo has to do with service, particularly religious service. And this verse, Jesus correlates it with worship that is honoring God and showing Him affection. So, our idea of a worship service, I talk to some people sometime, and they say, well, you know what, you don't really see the term worship service in the Bible, so should we even use that terminology? Well, no, you won't see it in your English Bible spelled out. They like Paul and Peter went to a worship service. No, you won't see that. But you do see both of those terms used interchangeably, referring to the same thing. And service part, the latreo part, that's talking about religious service here. Now, most often in the time that latreo is used, the most often it's used in the New Testament, it's designating Jewish worship. Several times in Acts 7, and Acts 26, Romans 9, Hebrews 8. And I can give you, for the sake of time, we're not going to read every single one of them, but I can afterwards print out my notes here if you want them to look these up. Several times in Hebrews it's used. In Luke chapter 2, verse 37, this word is used to talk about how Jews worship God with fasting and with prayer. Now go to John 16, verse 2. Here it's used metaphorically. Jesus is talking to his apostles about the persecution they're going to go through. The last part of the verse. The hour is coming when whoever kills you will think that he is offering service to God. Latreo, worship, religious service. Carrying, the way the pagans would use it, carrying out cultic duties. We'll take cultic out and just say carrying out duty. Look at what he's prophesying here. Whoever kills you will think that he's offering service to God. Doesn't that remind you of Saul of Tarsus? Because why was he persecuting Christians? Because he thought that he was serving God, that he was offering latreo, religious service to God, by doing so. And speaking of Paul, go over to, after he became a Christian, go to Romans 1, verse 9. Romans 1, verse 9, he says, "For God is my witness, whom I serve, latreo, with my spirit in the gospel of his Son." So Paul's using the word to describe his overall service to God. And again, this is another example of his use of what the non-Christians who made up the majority of that culture. He used a word that the non-Christians would have applied to their own religious cults and what they did in their own religions. But he is taking that and he's applying it to his own Christian service to the gospel here. He does it again in 1 Timothy and several times in Acts as well. Go over to Romans 12. This is one of the more well-known times the word's used. Romans 12, verse 1. And someone read that for me.
Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship.
What translation do you have there?
So I've got the NIV.
NIV?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And it says that it uses the word worship. This is your, how does it refer to?
True and proper worship.
True and proper worship. Now, mine uses the term worship too, English Standard Version, which says this is your spiritual worship. Does anyone have something different?
I do.
What does yours say?
I have New King James Version, and it says this is your reasonable service.
Is your reasonable service. Now, latreo was being used by the pagan cults originally, carrying out your cultic duties, performing your religious services. Okay, the pagan sacrifices that they would have been offering to Zeus and Aphrodite and whoever, they would be using this Greek word to describe that kind of worship. Okay, but notice the sacrifices that he is telling Christians now. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Now, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. What does that mean? To present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Give me some thoughts.
Sacrificing the desires of your flesh, putting the work of the spirit for it.
How much are you doing that?
According to this, should be all of it.
It should be all of it. A living sacrifice. It's very, aren't we glad that he said living rather than dead sacrifice? Because then that pretty much, if he had said dead, then that he would be pretty much telling us to do to ourselves what the pagans do to their animals and what the Jews did in the Old Testament in the animal sacrifice, right? Present your physical bodies as a sacrifice, but it's a living sacrifice. So this is basically to put in another way what you're correctly saying. This is the command for us to offer our entire lives to God in his service, right? Now, it's appropriate that the term worship is, that latreo is translated worship here. The reason why it's appropriate is because worship is all about service and sacrifice. Now, the idea that people get confused with this is I've heard some people say that this verse is saying that your entire life is worship. Your entire life is conscious devotion to God. And when you just stop and think about that, that cannot be true for many times for reasons out of our control. To give you an example, when you are asleep, what are you doing? How are you serving God? How are you worshiping him in any way? You're not. Okay. What about, who here is sinless? Anyone? That's part of your life, isn't it? Isn't it part of your life? Sin? I mean, we hesitate to say that as Christians, but what does 1 John 1:8 say? If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Is that worship to God? No, it's not. The idea that Paul is putting forth is, you look at, again, he's using a term that his readers, the Roman church, were all converted out of paganism. Okay? So the very first time in their lives they heard this term latreo, they originally associated with pagan worship. And so what he is saying is, look at what you did when, in the times in your life that you set aside to offer those sacrifices to Zeus. You were completely devoted to your God. And you went through personal sacrifice. I mean, to offer up the best ox that you had, how much do you think that sets you back financially back then? A lot, right? Because animals were money. They didn't have dollars and cents back then. Animals were the money. Well, I guess they did have coins and everything, but the animals were a big part of the currency. Okay? So it's a sacrifice. It's a financial sacrifice. David would say in 2 Samuel, I am not going to offer to God what costs me nothing. You are costing, even in the pagan world, you were doing something that cost you something. Okay? Now, you didn't do it all the time. You just did it at the times that you set aside. Okay? Christians, God, when we gather together on Sundays in that room over there, God wants us to be completely focused on Him and showing Him honor, right? Okay. So, very similar to the mindset that the pagans would have towards their false gods. What he is saying here is that mindset that you had at certain times, this is the goal that I want you to have for your entire lives, that you were willing to sacrifice in your worship, to first to Zeus and now to God when you come together on Sundays. I want you to have that same sacrificial, I am going to serve you mindset for your entire life. You will never be able to completely 100% meet this because of your physical limitations, and also because, even more relevant, because of sin. We will never reach that sinless state where all we do 100% of our waking moment is serve God. We will fail. But I want you to be working towards it. That's why the next verse says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And in the Greek, those are present tense verbs. It is something that you are to continually be doing. What is your spiritual service? The same type of service that you would give in a worship service? That mindset is what I want your entire lives to be. Not all of life is a worship service or a worship assembly, but the mindset that we have when we come together to worship, that sacrificial, showing God reverence, I am involved in serving God in a religious way, that mindset, that's what He wants us to work towards. And I'll tell you, you see little hints of it throughout the Bible. To give you an example, what's one of the things we do when we come together to worship? We sing, right? We sing. James 5, verse 13. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing songs. Now, what is God basically saying? Think about that. Does the verse say, is anyone cheerful on a Sunday morning in the church building? Let him sing songs? No, it's just like, is anyone cheerful? What does God want you to do? Start singing praises to Him. You're going about your day. And it's not Sunday, and you're not here. It's Tuesday, and you're driving your car, and you're in a good mood. What's God saying? Hey, you're in a great mood. Guess what? Great time to worship me. It's a great time to serve me. And I'll tell you something. When there have been times in my life where I haven't done this like I should, and then there have been times in my life when I have. There have been times in my life when I have limited my worship in song and in prayer. I've limited my prayer life and my singing praises to God to just this building on Sundays and Wednesdays. It's no coincidence when I look back at those times. It's no coincidence that if I had to grade my Christianity, it wouldn't be an A. It wouldn't even really be a B either. But then there are also times when I have, keeping this concept in mind, this Romans concept in mind, where I decided, and it took conscious effort, no, I'm going to be worshiping God every day throughout the week. And so I'm driving along, I'm sitting at the park, and the girls are playing on the playground, and I find myself that I'm in a good mood. You know, there was a time, and there still is, when I'm in a good mood, I'll pop in my favorite pop band and sing along, right? In headphones, right? Nothing wrong with that inherently, but why not turn off the rock band and just sitting there at the park bench, just start singing Amazing Grace softly to myself and honoring God. There's been times when I've been walking my dog. One of the members of the school, the staff, Ashley and I were walking into the building this morning, and she was walking, and she said, "You live on Harris Beamer Road, don't you? You live near it. I saw you walking your dog there last night." And so we started talking about that. I'm walking my dog, right? Sun's going down. It's beautiful. Why not just sit while I'm walking? Why not just thank God for the beautiful sunset and just start talking to Him in prayer? You're worshiping, you're serving, you're not in an assembly, but you're making it a part of your life. You are presenting your bodies as a living sacrifice. That latreo, that sacrificial service, that, what's the definition? To perform religious service. That's not your entire 24/7 life, as some say, no, but you're making it a regular part of your life. That's what he's talking about here. In fact, you're making it the most important part of your life. It's a lifelong goal, but it's something that we have to work at every day. But that's really what he's talking about here. Just as we put God first in our worship assemblies, or we should, we put God first every day in our daily lives. Does that make sense? Any thoughts or questions? All right, what we're going to do is, we got 5 minutes left, but what we're going to do, well, I think I can cover this next one real quick. The next one on the list is threskia. Threskia literally means religious service. Again, the pagans of that time, this was one of their words that a Greek word that they used to refer to a cult. This is the religious service. This is the external expressions of worship. Okay, this is talking about the rituals. This is talking about what people around you would be seeing. So, to give you an example, is it biblically required that you bow your head and close your eyes and do this in order to pray? No, but it's a human tradition. But what is it about it? Why? Especially when we're training kids, why do we tell them to do that? Because it's a training method. It's something outward that they can see, that we all can see, and therefore we associate it with worship. In this case, prayer. That's the concept behind threskia. It's talking about religious service, or it's a word that they used for cult back then. It's the external expression of worship. This word was used to refer to Judaism as a whole in Acts 26, verse 5. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 18, Paul condemned the worship of angels. You should not worship angels. This is the word that he used there for worship. Now, the only time that it's applied to actual Christianity in the New Testament is in a verse that you guys have heard before, James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Let's go over there and someone read it for me. James 1, verses 26 and 27.
If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. True religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world.
All right, the term religious in verse 26, the term religion in verse 26, the term religion in verse 27. It's threskia. Literally, religious service, the external expressions of worship. Now, the external expressions, isn't that what he's talking about in both of these verses? Hey, if you think you're religious and yet you don't bridle your tongue, well, how you talk, that's an external expression of who you are on the inside, isn't it? You can tell a lot about a person by listening to what they say and how they say it on a regular time, over a period of time, right? It's what you put out there externally. If anyone thinks he is religious, threskia, and in other words, doesn't watch what he says, he's not only deceiving his heart, but the last part of verse 26, this person's religion, this person's threskia, is worthless. Then verse 27, religion or threskia, external expressions of worship and service, that is pure and undefiled before God the Father, here it is. And then he's talking about things that people can see about you. To visit orphans and widows in their affliction. The word visit in the Greek, what that's talking about is not just stopping by for a 15-minute social call, although it's included in that, but actually stopping by with the idea of, what can I do to help you? Let me help you. Offering service, sacrificial service to those who are in need, widows and orphans. And when you help others, people notice. People notice. Even when you do it privately, the very fact that you're helping someone, they notice. And unless you're dealing with just a completely judgmental, horrible person, I'm not pointing to you, but unless you're dealing with someone like that, yeah, when you genuinely help someone because you are genuinely interested in their well-being, you want to help them. How do they look at you? Oh, I'm starving and you just gave me the best meal I've ever had. You are a terrible person. No, what is it they God bless you. Thank you. Your stature has risen. External. You want religion that pleases God. You want service that pleases God. You want worship that pleases God. People have to be able to see that you are a servant of God. Same thing with the last part of the verse, keeping yourself unstained from the world. If your neighbors and your coworkers, if they know that you profess to be religious, they see the Bible at your workstation. They see during the lunch break, they see the bowed head, the prayer for the food. They know that you go to church. Maybe you talk about what you do at church on Facebook or something. But while you're at work, you are one of the most vulgar talking, dishonest, and they can't trust you. The money keeps mysteriously disappearing from the till whenever you're up front. What are they going to think about your religion? You're a hypocrite, and your religion is worthless. But if they know that you're a churchgoer and you're a religious person, and your day-to-day life backs that up, not that you're perfect, but that you are working hard to keep yourself unstained from the world. If you do mess up, let's say you lose your temper. We all have done that, right? Lose your temper. You lose your temper and you lose your temper with a coworker, and then 5 minutes later or the next day or whenever, hey, you know what, man, I gotta apologize to you. Again, this is all external. It's what people see. And that's what proves that your religion is pleasing to God. Okay? Now, Matthew 6 talks about beware of practicing your righteousness before men in order to be seen by them. If your goal is to be seen by them so that you can get that pat on the back, that praise, I have so much respect for you. Oh, you don't tell me that. Just keep it coming, but don't tell me that. Keep it coming. If that's how you are, that's what Jesus condemns. But if the praise of men, it doesn't even matter to you, you're just wanting to do what God says. People will notice, and that's a good thing. In fact, that's evangelistic. It's part of the gospel, spreading the gospel. And that's what religion, threskia, religious service, is all about, the external expressions of worship. Any thoughts or questions on this? All right, we'll stop there. And next week, we'll continue this. And we'll go through the other two terms that are on your list there, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how these terms are used in the concept of Christian worship today. And have you all ever heard this term from the Bible before? This phrase, "Call upon the name of the Lord." You ever heard of that? Does that have anything to do with worship in the Bible? We're going to be talking about that next week as well. Thank you all for coming. Let's go to the word prayer. Father, thank you for giving us this time to study more about what your word says about worship, the different ideas and concepts that you've brought out in the words you inspired the writers of the New Testament to use. We pray that our understanding of worship and serving you has been strengthened tonight. And I ask your blessings upon all of us as we try to apply what we've learned to our own lives. Help us to be more profitable servants, Father. And we do sin and fail at times, and for this we ask your forgiveness and your mercy. I ask your blessings on everyone here, especially help them to have a safe trip back to their homes. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Did you say that you